Greetings and welcome back, gentles and ladiesmen, to another rip-snorting review here on my channel. Last time we met, we looked at Pac-Man World on the PlayStation and Game Boy Advance, and kicked off the mediocre marathon, where we're looking at re-releases that are decisively not so great. And last time we met, I promised a review of Mega Man based on the Super Nintendo and Game Boy Advance to continue that marathon. But the farther I got into scripting that video, the more I realized how important it was to offer some background as to my own experiences with the classic series as a whole. Because after all, Mega Man Base came out after Mega Man 8, so that's 8 other games that came out before it and all that. So that's what we're going to be doing here today. This is a companion video to the Mega Man Base review. And for that, I'm going to be dredging up an old segment I haven't done since like 2014, I think. Mini reviews where I offer bite-sized impressions on games I don't have time to review in full. So, without further ado, let's get right to it. For some brief background, Mega Man was originally created for Capcom by Akira Kitamura and Kaiji Inafune in the mid-1980s. Then known mostly for arcade games, Capcom wanted to branch out into console exclusives and hired a new team of recent college graduates to do just that. They went on to develop what we now know as Rockman, known internationally as Mega Man, a vastly superior name if I do say so myself. I get the whole rock and roll music pun that they've got going on, but what the hell is a Rockman? Mega Man just makes a lot more sense for this character. Although the first game enjoyed limited success, Inafune and company were allowed to develop a sequel on the side while finishing other projects. The resulting Mega Man 2 shattered all sales expectations and turned Mega Man into the household name he is today, spawning 4 more sequels on the NES, 2 sequels on the SNES, 1 sequel on the PlayStation and Saturn, and 2 8-bit revivals on 7th gen systems. That's not to mention all the Game Boy, Arcade, and WonderSwan spin-offs that came out around the same time. Mega Man is now a mega franchise that spans multiple series, some of which resemble the original Mega Man games and others which cross over into other genres entirely. I should note right off the bat that I'm no stranger to Mega Man. I've played all the console classic games, at least dabbled in all the mainline X titles, played through the ZX duology, and finished the Legends trilogy. Mega Man as a franchise has an incredibly varied quality standard, containing some of the greatest games ever made as well as some of the absolute worst. Out of all the different flavors of Mega Man out there, my favorite is still Vanilla Mega Man, more commonly referred to as the classic series. The Legends trilogy was pretty damn solid for its own reasons, but the X series only realistically has 4 or 5 good games in it, and I was really unimpressed with ZX's attempts at combining Metroidvania with Mega Man and succeeding at neither. There's a certain elegant simplicity to the classic series, and that's part of what gives it such a timeless and universal appeal in my opinion. The thing about reviewing classic series Mega Man games is that they're all pretty much the same, so you kind of have to nitpick and compare and contrast a lot to discuss how they stack up against each other. Seeing as Mega Man Base is one of the last games in the series, and considering I haven't reviewed the other games before it, that presents kind of a problem when it comes to discussing how that game compares to the rest of the franchise. I'm also well aware of the wealth of remake or re-break opportunities within the Mega Man franchise. Mega Man The Wily Wars, Mega Man Powered Up, Mega Man Maverick Hunter X, Rockman 7 Famicom, Rockman 8 Famicom, etc. I have every intention of coming back to at least some of these games someday and giving them the in-depth review or remake or re-break treatment they deserve. For now, in the interest of keeping the current marathon going, these are my popcorn reviews on the first 8 classic Mega Man games. On that note, I apologize that it took so long to get this particular video out, and while part of that has to do with me starting a new job and tending to other channels, a lot of it was just me slacking off, and there might have been some Super Mario Odyssey binging in there as well. I'm going to try my best to get Mega Man and Base done as quickly as I can after this episode. Anyways, Mega Man 1. This game lays out the groundwork for the entire franchise, with a stage select right off the bat, your characters collecting powers from defeating bosses, and certain bosses being weak to certain weapons. As the first installment in the series, there are only 6 Robot Masters, and only Bomb Man and Cut Man are really beatable as first picks, while bosses like Fireman or Elecman are essentially unbeatable without their weaknesses. The level design is decently challenging and has more platforming than later games in the series, but Iceman's block platforming is really obnoxious without the magnet beam. The weapon weapon design is also really one-sided, with the elect beam overshadowing every other option with its wide coverage and low ammo consumption. While some of the music is really good, like Elect Man's theme, most tracks have that early NES sound to them and aren't quite as good as future entries. Mega Man is an overall good first attempt that, barring some snafus, I think is better than a lot of people credit it for nowadays. While not one of the best entries in the series, it's held up way better than most games from that time. This is an NES game I don't mind revisiting. Mega Man 2. This is the first game to feature the standard 8 Robot Masters as well as energy tanks, though you can only hold a few of these and they disappear when you get a game over. The soundtrack is phenomenal and one of the best on the NES. The level design is a nice improvement overall, with occasional branching pathways and optional goodies, setting a good precedent for the series. Unfortunately, Mega Man 2 once again locks you into a strict weakness order if you play on the original Japanese difficulty, though obviously this won't be as big of an issue if you're playing on the Western-only normal difficulty, but the trade-off is that it also makes the game far too easy. And once again, an otherwise nice assortment of weapons is completely overshadowed by the Metal Blade, which is just as broken as the Elect Beam was. Also, the block platforming section in Heatman stage is easily the worst one ever made, so unless you want to waste your time memorizing it, item number 2 is essentially required to beat the stage. Mega Man 2 overall is a transformative sequel, resolving many issues from the first one and setting up the Mega Man formula as we know it. That said, nothing about Mega Man 2 really stands out to me as the best Mega Man game ever made, if you ask me, seeing as nearly every sequel improves upon it in some way. I can't say I understand why this particular classic series game is so often heralded over and above the rest. Don't mistake me, I think Mega Man 2 still stands well as a fine game in its own right, but with its weaker boss design, strict weakness order, and poor weapons balancing, it pales compared to future entries. Mega Man 3. The first half of Mega Man 3 is really solid, and on its own offers a superior experience to Mega Man 2. I just want to note real quick that the stripe on the left side of the screen is not an accident. The footage is an exact 4x scale of the original 256 by 224 NES frame, with the border forming a snug fit around it, and the stripe is due to how the NES renders and displays name tables for certain games. If you want to learn more about it, check out this video here, links in the description. The level design is really solid, the bosses are slightly improved, the graphics are excellent, the weapons balancing has been improved so that no single weapon overshadows the rest, and the music is my favorite of the entire NES sextology. Mega Man 3 is also noteworthy for introducing rush adapters and the slide, both of which would go on to become series staples going forward. Unfortunately, the back half of Mega Man 3 takes a nosedive, making it my overall least favorite entry of the original 6. For one thing, the Gemini Laser and Topspin are two of the most worthless weapons in Mega Man history. Seriously, the Thunder Wool has nothing on this. For another thing, the game has not one, but 3 weakness chains to memorize, one for 3 of the Robot Masters, another for the remaining 5, and a third for the Mega Man 2 rematches, which is just annoying. The final castle is also one of the weakest in the series, offering very little challenge as a final dungeon in both level design and bosses. But what really kills Mega Man 3 for me is the Dock Robots. These are 4 of the most annoying stages in the entire classic series, with this Rush Jet section in Needleman basically forcing you to get a game over if you've already gotten all the weapon energy. The Dock Robots themselves were just unnecessary and hit way too hard, and the checkpointing in these stages was not well thought out at all. Mega Man 3 is a good game, but it's easily the least consistent in quality of the original 6, and I've always found it to be my least favorite of the NES games to revisit. In case my criticizing Mega Man 3 wasn't controversial enough, the critically mixed Mega Man 4 is by far my favorite installment of the original 6, for many reasons. For one thing, it has by far the best opening sequence in the entire series, making for the overall best presentation. While the music isn't as good as Mega Man 2 and 3, all the other elements are very well done. The level design takes everything that worked in the first half of Mega Man 3 and expounds upon it, delivering the best batch of stages yet. The Mega Buster has been upgraded with a great new charge feature, which makes quick work of mini-bosses and means that practically any boss is a feasible first pick, though Toadman is still there if you want a convenient weakness run. While a lot of people complain that the chargeable buster makes the special weapons less useful, I actually find that Mega Man 4's weapons are the most consistently useful of the entire NES sextology. Seriously, I found a level design used for pretty much all of these weapons, which is a huge improvement over all the previous games where I either relied on mostly one weapon for the entire game or found certain weapons to be entirely useless. The castle stages are the best yet, with Dr. Cossack's Fortress being my favorite castle in the series aesthetically. The difficulty design of Mega Man 4 is also rock solid, offering challenging levels while cutting down on what bullshit there was from the previous 3 games. The plot has some dumb twists in it, but other than that, I enjoyed pretty much everything about Mega Man 4 from beginning to end. This is the definitive NES Mega Man experience, if you ask me. Mega Man 5. This story offers a more consequential follow-up to Mega Man 3 and has a pretty solid opening sequence that creates a lot of intrigue. Most of the highlights of 4 carry over to this game as well. You've got pretty solidly designed levels, bosses that are approachable with or without their weaknesses, some interesting level gimmicks, well-designed castle stages, and the best graphics yet. Unfortunately, this is the 5th game in the series, releasing in 1992, and by this point, it felt like the NES was stifling the developers' creativity. There really is no good reason whatsoever as to why Mega Man 5 and 6, the latter of which came out the same year as Donkey Kong Country, couldn't and shouldn't have been on SNES or Genesis. But beyond that fact, Mega Man 5 simply struggles to improve on anything or bring anything substantially new to the table. Be it the super arrows and the new rush coil aren't substantial or useful gimmicks, and the soundtrack is the least consistent yet, with excellent title and Fortress themes, but completely forgettable Robot Master themes. But the biggest problem with Mega Man 5 is the overall low level of challenge. This is the easiest game in the classic series by far, with ineffective enemies, easy platforming sections, uneventful stage design, and unchallenging bosses. Not to mention that the game absolutely showers you with lives and energy tanks. The chargeable buster was also changed to have a larger radius, which makes it way easier to kill enemies without special weapons. But they also decided to make it so that taking damage cancels out your charge for some reason, which I find really irritating. Thank Hylia they changed it back in 7 and onward. Regardless, Mega Man 5 is a game where I only find myself using a couple special weapons and otherwise relying on charge shots. Because of all this, Mega Man 5 is a game that practically plays itself, and because of that, the whole experience just kind of goes in one ear and out the other. Even Pac-Man World, to which I directed similar criticisms, had more challenging stages. I guess I'd rather play Mega Man 5 than 1 or 3, but this is still one of the duller entries in the series, and it doesn't really stand out much on its own. Mega Man 6. Everything I just said about Mega Man 5 applies to Mega Man 6 as well, from the pedestrian stage design to the pathetic bosses to the game practically playing itself. While the new rush adapters sound interesting, the novelty fades pretty quickly when you realize that they only amount to a punching attack and admittedly useful platforming enhancement. The only saving grace that elevates Mega Man 6 over 5 is its unique globetrotting theming. All the robot masters and stages take inspiration from cultures around the world, which is something fun and new for Mega Man, however small in the grand scheme of things. The music is also marginally better than in 5, though I do find that a lot of it blends together. Other than that, Mega Man 6 to me is just a slightly more interesting Mega Man 5. And yeah, those are my thoughts on the original sextology in a nutshell. I really do think that these are 6 of the best games on the NES, standing the test of time far better than most of their contemporaries. The biggest reason for this is that for the most part, the difficulty design was much stronger than other games at the time. These games weren't made artificially and arbitrarily more difficult to force North American consumers to buy the game at full price instead of renting it for cheaper. These games are challenging but overall fair. Your life bar is actually worth a damn, unlike Castlevania. Health and energy drops are frequent and not made artificially more difficult to find for no reason, unlike Metroid. The bosses were strategic but very beatable, and your special weapons and adapters always gave you the edge you needed to overcome the greatest challenges. Compared to Castlevania 3, Zelda 1, or Metroid 1, which have some very dated design elements, the NES Mega Man games don't make me want to shut off the console and scramble for their 16-bit follow-ups. That's a testament to the timelessness of their design. Speaking of 16-bit follow-ups, Mega Man 7. After 6 games on the NES and 4 years into the 90s, the classic series was in desperate need of a major transition like this. And in my opinion, Mega Man 7 delivers with the best game in the series up to this point. While we can take the 16-bit transition for granted in retrospect, it still makes Mega Man 7 feel special and new, with bigger and more detailed sprites, more simultaneous colors, and more visually distinct bosses. The 16-bit transition also smiles upon the music as well, offering my favorite Mega Man soundtrack yet. Gameplay-wise, Mega Man 7 introduces intro and mid-stages to the series, and also splits the Robot Masters into 2 sets of 4, though you can skip the intro and fight all 8 from the beginning with the password. This new system eliminates a lot of the weakness chain guesswork from previous entries with only 4 stages to choose from right off the bat, and also gives Mega Man 7 a more developed difficulty curve than previous games. Additionally, the bosses are entirely beatable with just the chargeable Buster, and during Buster-only runs, these bosses are probably the best in the series so far, with recognizable strategies, perfectly avoidable attacks, and a decent fair level of challenge. Slash Man is the only exception, because even after so many playthroughs, I still don't know how you're supposed to avoid these stupid gelatin pies. But even he makes up for this by having 2 weaknesses. Unfortunately, weaknesses make over half of these guys a complete joke, which introduces a different problem. The game also appropriates some elements from the X series in the form of collectible upgrades within stages, as well as a shop mechanic if you don't feel like finding things yourself. This introduces an element of exploration to the series without forcing a lot of backtracking or starting you out with essentially a quarter of your health like in the X series. The shop, meanwhile, allows you to prepare for the final fortress in style, meaning that you'll never have to farm for E-tanks or lives anymore. The arsenal of special weapons is overall solid and varied, and I found myself not relying on the Charge Buster as much as I did in Mega Man's 5 and 6, but 4 still has the best batch of weapons yet if you ask me. Mega Man 7 combines the best elements of Classic and X for a game that is overall better than the games that inspired it. And yes, I do think that the X formula has some inherent flaws, but I'm gonna hold off on that until the inevitable review. If it wasn't for the fact that the final boss was deliberately designed to be unbeatable without a full stockpile of energy tanks, which is just bad design in my opinion, Mega Man 7 would be a nearly perfect Mega Man game in my opinion. Last but not least, Mega Man 8!
Mega Man 8!
Right off the bat, I have to address the playthrough I did on Game Mavericks. While my impressions of the game in that series were very negative, upon replaying it for the Mega Man and Bass video, my opinions changed completely. If I'm being honest with y'all, I actually think Mega Man 8 is pretty good, but I'm getting ahead of myself. While I still think this is one of the funniest playthroughs we've ever done.
Man, Mega Man, can you hear me? Is anything going on? Someone recorded over my episode of Squubs. Was it you?
It was as bad as other Let's Players I've criticized in the past when it comes to nitpickiness, bad playing, and misrepresenting the game's actual quality. The only thing I can say in our defense is that the experience of covering a game in a relatively blind Let's Play versus quietly recording it on your own for a review is very different. It's easier to let your emotions and external influences negatively impact your impressions of a game when you're in a groupthink scenario with 2 other people who just want to joke around and have fun. So, on behalf of the Game Mavericks, I'd like to apologize for failing to give Mega Man 8 a fair shake. That said, Mega Man 8. This game has by far the worst presentation in the entire classic series, with a translation and English dub that would make Sonic Adventure blush.
A strange meteor has fallen to Earth just a while ago. This meteor seems to be emitting a powerful energy signature.
Gameplay-wise, Mega Man 8 carries over the 2-tiered Robot Master system as well as bosses that put up a decent fair challenge for Buster-only runs. Thankfully, this time bosses stay challenging even with weaknesses, with the game encouraging you to alternate between the Buster and special weapons mid-battle. Consequently, this is easily the best batch of bosses in the entire classic series, if you ask me. The special weapons are the best since Mega Man 4 and all useful in their own situations, and what's nice is that the game assigns your Buster and special weapons to their own buttons, allowing you to seamlessly transition between the 2 mid-battle. It makes you wonder why no other game in the classic series brought this feature back. Mega Man 8 is also the best looking game in the series to date, offering a wonderfully cartoony aesthetic while avoiding the logical extreme of Powered Up's chibi style. While the soundtrack isn't quite as good as 7's in my opinion, it's still got a unique style to it and is pretty fun to listen to. Unfortunately, Mega Man 8's strengths are matched by some overpowering flaws. The game is overwhelmed with annoying stage gimmicks that make otherwise enjoyable stages a chore to play, like wandering around in giant mazes, or pissing away your lives in these terrible jetboarding sections. Additionally, bolts were changed from random enemy drops to single-use consumables that you collect from stages. This is unfortunate because power-ups like the super armor are essentially mandatory to finish this game, especially the final boss rush, but if you're not the type to play these kinds of side quests, you'll never be able to afford it. Mega Man 8 is an overall solid game with some unfortunate shortcomings. I'd offer my arbitrary ranking of these 8 games, but I think that'll just lead to people getting up in arms in the comments and would miss the point entirely. Suffice it to say that 4 and 7 are my favorites so far. And yeah, that pretty much covers my thoughts on Mega Man's 1 through 8. Finally, a short ExoParadigmGamer review. You thought it was impossible, but you thought wrong. Anyways, join me next time for the longest ever episode of Remake or Rebreak ever made. And it's a review of Mega Man and Bass of all things. Until then, I'm ExoParadigmGamer, and I hope you all enjoyed the review. Hello, hello, hello. Hope you all enjoyed the review. Exio here, and I just wanted to remind you of some of the other places you can go check me out on YouTube. First of all, we have EPG Plays, which is my Let's Play channel, still fairly new. Right now I'm doing a playthrough of DKC3 on Game Boy Advance, but after that we're going to be moving on to new pastures that'll hopefully interest more of you. Additionally, I also have my podcast channel, Unversed Cast, where myself, Haydogs, King K, and Rule, we read terrible fan fiction and we talk about video games, and it's a lot of fun. Come check it out. There might be a Sonic Forces episode coming out soon. It's the closest thing to a review you folks are gonna get anytime soon. So, yeah, see you guys next time for the Mega Man and Bass video.